If you're an Eastwood for Life fan, then you may want to check this one out. Because I think this movie is trying to be a Unforgiven, but with a female protagonist. We'll come on to that again. We are talking about A Reckoning. This one written and directed by Justin Lee, and stars June Dietrich as Mary O'Malley, who is our central protagonist. You've also got small roles here from Lance Henriksen and Meg Evelyn Foster here. So the story focuses on this character Mary, who is a homesteader. She's essentially a housewife whose husband is brutally murdered and cannibalised. And much to the surprise of everyone in this kind of local town, she's not just accepting it lying down. She wants to go out for revenge and track down and kill her husband's killer. Now, obviously, everyone's kind of up in arms because no woman should be doing this, obviously, in this kind of like day and age. But nonetheless, that's what she wants to do. And along the way, she will encounter various characters, some of whom will be sympathetic, some who may be somewhat antagonistic, ultimately culminating in facing down this cannibalistic killer. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. Now, I said this movie is trying to emulate, I think, this slow burn, dramatic sort of style of, for example, Unforgiven, which I think this movie, I reckon, is its main kind of influence. Now, does it succeed? Well, I don't think it does. Let's be honest. This movie has its share of problems, but I do want to talk about the positives first of all. Number one, I think this movie benefits from superb photography, and I genuinely mean very impressive photography for what clearly is a very kind of low budget movie. The movie really does benefit from being shot on location and having, to be quite honest, very impressive wide angle shots showing some great kind of scenic views of woodland, coastal areas, and I have to say, shot composition, things like that, does have an artistic edge to it, and I quite enjoyed this. I like the fact that our female protagonist isn't a Mary Sue. Her first kind of foray into conflict, and she's basically a quivering mess. And to be honest with you, the background that we know about this character, she's just a simple kind of like housewife. It's kind of, that's what would realistically happen. So I like the fact that this movie doesn't try and make her into a automatic kind of superhero, able to kind of take on, people who are genuine kind of threats and things like that. There is, a curve. I mean, admittedly, it's a steep curve, but at least there's a kind of a curve in regards to her progression as a potential fighter. There were some performances that I actually thought were quite good here, mainly from our smaller characters that weren't too bad, I have to say. I thought that some of the acting and the direction in regards to those scenes were pretty good. And I didn't mind some of the dialogue scenes here in regards to some of the characters. There's a piece where she kind of runs into these two rangers, I think they are, or something, and I quite like that scene, to be honest. And everyone kind of just dismisses her as kind of like, go back home, go and grieve, all of this such, but she's determined. So the movie is trying to have a message of showing self-determination and obviously trying to break kind of the stereotypes, especially of that. So that in a way is a commendable, thing to have, I suppose. However, let's be honest, this movie doesn't have a lot of story, to say the least. Unfortunately, the plot of this movie is virtually non-existent. This journey simply, I think, wants to show the scenery, because there's a hell of a lot of scenes here where Mary is just trumping through various kind of different locales, no dialogue, and it's, the scenery looks great, but obviously people are wanting to watch for a story. And I understand that, I think, like I've said, I think this movie's influence is the kind of the slower burn, more moody kind of westerns, like Unforgiven. And I'm not a huge western fan, to be honest with you, but I do think it's trying to have that vibe, so to speak. But obviously, this has just got relatively kind of amateur cast, low budget. Things like, for example, everyone kind of looks too clean. The clothes look too kind of like fresh and not dirty and that kind of stuff. They don't look used enough. Some of the acting I didn't mind. Some of it is a little kind of on the hokey side, I'm not going to lie. Our kind of screaming cannibal at the end is something straight out of some cheesy horror film. I mean, it's weird because the movie could have, I think, it could have taken the route of making us kind of a Western horror. You have essentially a crazed mountain man who is a cannibal. And I think it could have lent into the kind of like a horror aspect of this kind of like a horror Western. But it doesn't really do that because, to be honest with you, he doesn't really show up until late into the third act. So until then, it is just Mary going through this kind of this journey. And that's ultimately what the movie's trying to do. I mean, it's certainly not an action film. It's barely a drama because I say that the interactions are, to be honest with you, not necessarily badly acted. Although I do think, although I quite like Mary's dialogue scenes, I think she overacts in regards to some of the kind of her face acting. For example, we have a scene where she's trading with this one particular guy, and they kind of like they're bartering on price, and then she's kind of like got this big furrowed brow, kind of going, "Oh, I don't know if I trust you." It's really sort of like, yeah. I mean, Clint Eastwood can do the scowl. This lady, unfortunately, it looks kind of funny, I have to be honest. It looks overacting, but I didn't think the dialogue scenes were too bad, to be fair to her. It really doesn't kind of, it's not a violent movie. The kind of the shootout scenes, I've got to be honest with you, kind of seem like they were shooting like cat pistols and stuff like that. I mean, I suppose in a way you could argue, yeah, okay, then that might be somewhat realistic rather than the over-dramatised, gunfights and stuff like that you may see in certain films. But this movie is just way too slow with not a lot happening. The story is so slight. And the movie spends so much of its time just kind of like trundling through admittedly great looking kind of undergrowth and kind of scenes where we see the natural beauty. That's all great, but I'm sure that's probably not why people want to watch this movie. Lance Henriksen is essentially in one short scene, and like Meg Foster's in two scenes. So I don't really be expecting to see them. And I've got to be honest with you, Lance Henriksen looks like he's struggling in this movie, even with his very kind of short scene as it is. I think there is some potential here. But I think what this needs is another writer. I do think maybe Justin has got some directorial flourish, but I think writing is not the strong suit here. And I think this also needs a producer who can push back and kind of like, and curb some bad instincts and impulses maybe that I think the director is somewhat kind of, somewhat self-indulgent. To be honest with you, I think technically speaking, this movie has some good stuff to say about it, but as a narrative, it is just way too slow with nothing happening. And I've got to say that I think the climax as well is weak sauce because there could have been a lot more done with our kind of cannibal here, and I think he was actually ended up being quite weak. He reminded me of like a bad George Eastman performance, to be honest. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.